For inviting me to be here today. It's really remarkable, I think, and an example of a way that an arts organization can use technology to reach all over the world, even before we encountered this terrible pandemic. So I applaud Cello Bello and their incredible reach for years now, all over the world. So I'm coming to you from my home in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Your business idea needs a website?
And I am, excuse me, something's happening there. Okay, and I'm here, I live here in Raleigh with my lovely wife, Rosie, who is a brilliant cellist and teacher herself. And we have a couple cats, some koi in the backyard, and our dog Sunny, who is my co-host this afternoon. We'll see how he behaves, but I think he'll be pretty good. He's kind of tired right now. So I thought I would start today by talking a little bit about my experiences growing up and the different events that led to my career as it is now, and then I could take questions about cello, about recording, about anything else that I may know the answer to. So I grew up in Connecticut, and I was in a family of musicians. I was a Suzuki student. I studied at the Hart School Community Division, and in addition to music, I was always interested in technology in some capacity, whether it is mechanical objects or software, all those sorts of things. The inner workings really interested me. Puzzles are fascinating to me. So as I was growing up, I would, if an appliance or a machine or something in the house would break, it would always be in my basement. I would be taking it apart, figuring out how it worked, and occasionally fixing it. But it was I always like to know how things work exactly. And so as I was growing up and studying cello and messing around with technology in the basement, I was trying to figure out exactly what my future plans would look like. I couldn't imagine a life without music, but I was really enthralled with technology. So as I grew up, I had the opportunity, I believe it was my junior year in high school, I was looking at colleges. I was really thinking about ways that I would always incorporate music in my life, but I wanted technology to be involved, and so recording seemed like a really interesting pursuit. So when I was starting to think about going to college, I looked around for programs that would offer strong music programs and technology programs, and quickly settled on a few, and I was really interested in the program at the Cleveland Institute of Music that offered a double degree in recording technology and performance of an instrument. And when I went up there to visit, I had a lesson with Richard Aaron, who became my teacher in college, and it was a kind of a transformative moment for me, because the way that he approaches teaching, the way he approaches thinking about the way the instrument works and music works and how to play the instrument really connected with my way of thinking as well, which is I wanted to know, and I like to know, how the inner workings of everything happen. How do you get from one place to another on the fingerboard? How do you make a sound that's resonant and beautiful and full? And how do the mechanics of it all work? That was really fascinating for me, and it was an inspiring moment that really kind of got me really excited about the cello, really excited about technology, and so I ended up going to CIM and studying there with Richard and with Melissa Kraut, and at the same time studying recording technology. I had the opportunity to be a production intern at Telarc, the record label, which was incredible in itself. It was a really amazing experience to witness the other side of the microphone from performing. So that's really where I got deeply involved in both aspects of what would become my career. I continued on to get a master's degree at CIM, and then I went to the University of Minnesota. I continued my studies there with Tanya Remnikova. Was a wonderful teacher, cellist, just a terrific human being all around. And before I was finished with the degree there, I won my job in the cello section of the North Carolina Symphony. So I moved to Raleigh from Minneapolis, and I've been here for I think 7 years now, and it's been really, really wonderful. So throughout my cello development, I was also doing recording work. I would always, usually during the summers, I would find time to record an album, and then during the years, a lot of times I would be sent various things that people have recorded that either need to be repaired or need to be edited or mixed or whatever. And so that's basically the way that I arrived at what I am doing now, which is a really lovely balance of performing and recording. This very moment, of course, I'm doing much less performing than I am doing recording and editing and mastering various projects from a distance. But you never know what's going to happen. So it turned out to be a wonderful path for me. So I'd like to say that as I was studying recording at the same time as cello, I noticed there were a lot of connections. Just not only do I strongly believe that being a musician makes you a better recording engineer and producer, but I think the other way around is true, because using your ears is so important. And when you're a recording engineer and you're not playing, you're just listening, you can use that opportunity to teach yourself how to really listen to yourself as you are playing. I'm sure many of you students out there have been encouraged, if you don't already do it, to record yourself, to hear yourself play. I think a lot of us think we know what we sound like, but aren't quite sure when it actually comes out of the instrument. And for me, that means a lot more than listening back and realizing, oh, my F sharp was out of tune, or I was rushing a little bit there. It's really more about, for me at least, was that phrase effective? Did it tell the story that I intended it to tell? And a lot of times it's hard to tell when you're just playing it. And so recording yourself and listening to yourself critically in a way that's not so focused on the technicality, but also the musicality of it, is what can make for a really successful practice. Let's see. We have some questions. A most basic question. What mic type should we use now online lessons are becoming more important? Sure. So there are so many different options here with microphones, and these days when we're all stuck in our homes and trying to learn and teach remotely. What I'd like to say before I say a specific mic or type of mic really is just like an instrument, just like a cello, the very specific type of microphone you use, or the maker of your cello that you use, is not the most important thing. It's really a matter of how you use it and understanding how it works. So I would, especially when we're using, maybe our phones or our tablets, computers, webcams, and what I would recommend is getting some sort of a microphone that is separate from the microphone built into your device. The reason being, a lot of times the best location for your camera to be, where you can see everything that's happening, is not the best place for the microphone to be, especially in a small room where if you're not careful, there's going to be echoes bouncing all around out of control. You're going to want to have the microphone closer to you than the camera is. So a lot of companies make microphones for podcasting, and they have for years, that are very simple. They use a USB connection to plug right into your computer, or I believe with an adapter you can plug it into your phone or your tablet. And something like that is really, really useful in getting a better sound out of your lessons that you're having. Okay. Decent low-end video camera for home recordings. Oh, hi, Debbie. Yeah, so honestly, the very best way to get decent video for home recordings these days is going to be your cell phone. Any of the iPhone or Android phones in the last 2, 3, 4 years have quite good cameras with a lot of different settings that you can adjust to make sure that it gets a pretty good quality video. Otherwise, there are the little camcorders that Sony and Panasonic make that are a couple $100, but I would honestly say that your phone is likely the easiest way to get a decent video recording going. So, for example, another thing to think about, I mentioned about using the microphone in a different spot than the video, just because of the way that the microphone works, not necessarily the quality of the microphone. The way that it works is really, really important. So understanding how to get a good video out of your phone or an inexpensive camcorder is a great important skill to have. So one important thing to consider when you're filming is light. So you'll notice behind me I have these doors and the light is just pouring in. And generally speaking, having a backlight light behind you is a problem with video because your face, the subject of the video, because cameras don't have the enormous contrast that our eyes are capable of understanding, it'll end up being an image where the window behind me will probably become exposed correctly, where you can see the trees that are in the background, but I will be very dark. And I can actually show that to you right now because in order to get this shot to work even a little bit, I have two studio lights behind my computer right now that are reflecting off of the ceiling and coming back, giving me some light. So if I turn those off like that, all of a sudden it's not as good of an image. So turn them back on and you can see me again, and it balances out a little bit. I could change the orientation of my whole studio, but I really like the way that it is right now. So for these, whenever I'm on video teaching lessons or doing a seminar or a cello chat like this, I will have those lights going. So I think making sure that if you don't have, they don't need to be studio lights, but if you have a lamp that you can put in front of you to balance the lights coming from behind you, or change your orientation. So perhaps if I flipped 180 degrees and I used the natural light coming in, and then I would probably not need these studio lights and it would look much different, but I don't want to put my desk right in front of my doors. Okay, we have another question. Wonderful, okay. So, do I know of any advancements with online lessons? In other words, will we ever be able to play at the same time online? I hear programs are coming out. Okay, that's a wonderful question. So, the issue with playing at the same time is an issue with latency. And latency is, when we're talking about communications, digital transmissions, really has to do with the time it takes not only to send my data to you and your data to me, but also the time it takes for the video camera to process everything that it's seeing and turn it into ones and zeros in the digital realm, and the microphone to do the same, lining them up, a little bit of computation to turn it into, to compress it, make it something that will use less data so that you can actually send it to people who don't have super high-speed internet connections. So I think especially with the pandemic, people are working really, really hard to lower that latency. There's always going to be a little bit of transmission time, if only because the speed that electricity can travel, the physical distance from one place to another, is always going to be a challenge. But it's going to get much, much better. A few things that you can do personally are if you're able to plug in to your network modem with an Ethernet cable, so you're plugged in rather than wireless. Using wireless internet is another step removing you from the person with whom you're trying to connect. So that is, you're still not going to be able to play at the same time or at this moment if you're able to plug in your Ethernet cable, but it'll make the transmissions a little bit better. So currently there are some technologies out there that first of all require an Ethernet connection and require a little bit of technical know-how, a little bit of maybe not programming, but software formatting that will let you, at least with your audio, send really, really quickly back and forth. But in terms of setting it up quickly for a lesson, we're not quite there yet. But I think it's definitely something that a lot of people are working on. Understand too that because of the time it takes for data to travel, which the speed of electricity, the speed of light essentially, which is extraordinarily fast, but it is not instant. So if you wanted to collaborate with somebody the next town over from you, it would be easier than if you were trying to connect with somebody on the other side of the world. We think the internet makes us all connected, but it does take time for a signal to travel 10,000 miles. Okay, let's see here. Next question. Could I please talk about the differences between large diaphragm, small diaphragm, and ribbon mics, specifically for cello recording? Oh, absolutely. That's a wonderful question. I'm going to take a drink of water. Excuse me. So let me grab a prop, actually. I think that'll help. So for those of you that do not know, microphones work essentially by, there's a small element, we'll call it. It's a diaphragm, or it's a very lightweight, delicate object that essentially replicates your eardrum, that takes the mechanical vibrations that travel through the air and turn them into electrical signals that we then amplify and turn into recorded sound and amplified sound that we know. So the question, large diaphragm, small diaphragm, ribbon, that refers to the properties of the diaphragm, the element that receives the sound, and how it then turns that into an electrical signal. So right here, I have a small microphone, and it is a small diaphragm microphone, which literally means the diaphragm, which in here you can see, kind of, is just a small, I believe this one is a gold-plated disc. It's a small diaphragm microphone, and generally speaking, small diaphragm microphones are more accurate, especially with high-frequency recordings, and that is because the small diaphragm, it's a small disc, it's a small object. It can more accurately be affected by the sound waves that are traveling past it and into it, because it doesn't have as much physical mass that to affect the diaphragm, to make it physically move. So a lot of times, and we can get into the whole debate, analog versus digital, and that'll have to be for another CelloChat, excuse me. But essentially, generally speaking, a large diaphragm microphone, which I don't have one super handy, but it might look something like this, has a much bigger diaphragm. The large diaphragm, technically, it'll color the sound a little bit more because it takes a little bit more energy to make it move. So if an instrument is particularly bright, then if you're recording it with a large diaphragm microphone, that instrument will be mellowed a little bit because the high energy, high frequency waves that are hitting the diaphragm don't affect it as much because it's bigger. So generally speaking, if you want an accurate recording, which is often what I'm trying to do when I'm doing recording, I'm going to use a small diaphragm microphone that will react a little bit more accurately to the way that the sound appeared in the room. I'll say that, and it's a broad generalization. But and then a ribbon microphone, that's another question. I love ribbon microphones. They look totally different, okay? So while you might think you talk into it like this or play into it like this, you actually play into it right here. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to if I can get the light just right, you'll be able to see. And I think the answer is, well, maybe. So if you see there's a long line, metallic line right in here, and that's the ribbon. So instead of a circular disc that is resonating, this is a long, thin ribbon that picks up the sound that vibrates and turns that mechanical energy into an electrical signal, and it does so it reacts in a slightly different way. Ribbon microphones will often reject sound from the sides and accept sound from the front and the back, and they often will have not quite of a powerful signal coming out of the microphone because it's such a big element that takes a little bit more energy in the sound to excite the element to get it to really to react to the sound. So basically, the ribbon microphone, generally speaking, now can warm up the sound a little bit, and it'll have really nice grit and weight to it. I love mixing ribbon microphones with small diaphragm condenser microphones. I think it makes for a wonderful balance of power and accuracy and brilliance in the sound. So I don't usually record just with ribbon microphones because a lot of the high end you'll lose, but it's a wonderful tool for me to use in conjunction with the small diaphragm condensers that I often use. Let's see. Oh, here's a cello question. Wonderful. So Charles wants to know, he started playing the Haydn Cello Concerto in C, and he wants to know how to practice the fast notes. Okay, so how to practice the fast notes? I'll start with one word, and I'm sure you've heard it before, slowly. So what exactly does that mean? How to practice the fast notes slowly? It can be as simple as this. You want to make sure that you are actually playing and going through every single motion that you intend to. A lot of times, as we're growing as cellists and we're developing our skills, we can get away with some things if we're not careful. You can practice and you can play through some fast notes and kind of sneak by and realize, oh yeah, it sounds pretty good. But there are a few issues with that. First of all, it's not going to be consistent. You're going to have issues with being able to replicate the practicing that you've done in perhaps more of a high-stress situation like a performance. If you don't really know exactly how everything works, how you're getting from one spot to the next, and how you're not going to be able to have success in perhaps a more stressful situation. So what can you do to practice it slowly? It's not just a matter of slowing it down and going through the motions of playing all of the notes. It's a very active, brain-oriented practice. So you want to do a couple of things. I would start with having a metronome so that you don't start speeding up inadvertently as you're making progress through a certain passage. I would isolate a specific section, whether it is a beat of 16th notes or a measure or a couple of measures, into something that's a very easily achievable passage that you can practice slowly. And here's the best thing. When you're practicing slowly at first, it should be easy. It should be really, really easy. You want to practice slowly enough so you have time to think what you are doing from one note to the next and be able to execute it every time with great accuracy. It's important to be able to make it repeatable and give yourself time to think about what you're doing between every note, how you're placing your fingers down, where you're shifting, how you're getting around the instrument. But it's just really, really important to start so slowly. I'm not talking about half tempo or, a little bit under tempo or whatever. I'm saying slow it down. You're playing one note per beat at 60 on the metronome or something. So you do have a second, literally 1 second, to figure out what you're doing for the next note. And this isn't something that you're going to do for an entire movement. You're not going to sit down and play, you're not going to sit down and play an entire movement at 16th note equals 60. That's not an effective way to practice. But isolating the really, really tricky spots, slowing it way down so it's so slow that you can actually think about what you're doing between every single note. And then bringing it up from there in a gradual pace. It'll take a long time, but if it's only 2 measures, all of a sudden, if you spend half an hour working like that, you're going to master 2 measures and you'll have it in your back pocket forever. It's a great question. Okay, let's see. Starker said, create excitement, but don't get excited. Really? Oh, that's a wonderful quote. I understand the premise, I believe. So, when I'm performing, it's important that I'm expressing the music in the way that I want it to be expressed. I've perhaps recorded myself and I'm happy with the way that it sounds. But in an extremely emotional section or athletic section or something that is, just very big, difficult musically or technically, something like that, inside you have to be cool as a cucumber. You have to be able to understand and execute everything that you've practiced. So I love that quote, and I would say yes, absolutely. It's much different performing music than listening to music. You don't necessarily always get the luxury of enjoying a performance as a passive listener when you are the one playing it. But kind of coming from the other side, if you're calm and collected but can express your musical ideas through the technical practice that you've done, I think you'll find a lot more success rather than getting extremely energized on the inside and then perhaps finding yourself either lost in the technical mission that you have to achieve, or maybe you're pressing down on the strings so hard because you're so excited that you're not really creating the beautiful sound that you've practiced. I'd like to actually go on a little bit of a tangent from that question too, because sound production became a really important part of my cello development as it connected to my recording studies. So the first thing I really think is important to understand when you're working on creating sound out of your instrument is the space that you are in. We don't perform in a vacuum. The sound that's literally coming out of your instrument is not the only sound that reaches the listener's ear. The room you're in, the hall you're in, makes a really, really big difference in the way that your sound and your tone is perceived. So if I'm practicing here in my studio at home, I understand a couple of things. First, I am not in a concert hall that seats 2,000 people. So that means I'm surrounded by walls and a ceiling that's not 40 feet high. And so if I am playing something, and these days if I'm recording something in my small room, I need to understand that the sound coming from my cello is interacting with the room in a really, really big way. So whenever I go to a new space to perform or to record, I want to listen to the room, listen to the way that the cello reacts in the room, and the way that the sound coming out of the cello interacts with the space. So where you can get away with really digging in, and maybe there's a little bit of crunch in a big concert hall. It's not something you can get away with in a small space that's maybe a string quartet would play in a parlor or something. It would, it makes for a different way of approaching performing, depending on the space that you're in. You can, and that's what's so difficult about practicing, I think, because if you practice for a practice room and you only think about performing in a practice room, when you get into a big hall, it's going to be a little bit different. So I encourage all of you, when we're all again able to be in different spaces, when we can perform by ourselves and with others for audiences and all of that, I encourage you to spend a couple minutes at least in your new performance or recording or practice space and listen to the way that the room interacts with your instrument, because it really does change the way that you sound. Okay. So it seems as though, especially during a studio recording session, the audience must be able to see your emotional, overt investment to the piece performance as opposed to phoning it in. Yeah, I think there's a really big visual element to performance. And I've noticed that when, even going from recording, like even audition tapes when schools and competitions would require just an audio-only recording versus now when they require video recordings. And audio recordings, you need to do so much more to get across your musical ideas. You have to exaggerate your dynamics. You have to exaggerate the musical ideas you have, in addition to always the pressure of being, I don't want to say perfect, but performing at the highest level that you possibly can. So let's see, the visual aspect can make the recording a little bit easier because being able to watch somebody move, I believe, when they play and express themselves when they play, I think that really enhances the experience a little bit from time to time. But I think that too much focus on the visual aspect of your performance can be a mistake, because if you are able to express music with just sound, then it's going to be an effective performance. If you need the visual element to tell a musical story, to be expressive, then I think there's probably something missing from the way that you're thinking about the musicality of your performances. So when you record yourselves, when you practice, as I hope you all will after we finish this chat, try recording just the audio. Or, if you want to record a video, that's fine, but close your eyes when you listen to it. See if you still expressed the same musical concept and idea that you thought you did with your eyes closed. Because I really strongly believe that any beautiful musical idea can be expressed without the visual element, but if you only rely on the visual element to express your musical idea, then I think you have a little bit more thinking to do in your musical ideas for phrasing and the like. One thing I like to talk with students about a lot is contrast in everything. So dynamics and in phrasing and everything that can make contrast, I think, is what makes music and many parts of life really, really exciting. So contrast with dynamics, for example, is a really tricky concept, because I feel like if people get too excited and they're playing and they just want to play louder and louder and louder, at this climax of whatever piece that you're playing, you have to realize that we're playing the cello. It's an acoustic instrument. We can't just decide we're going to turn it up a little bit because we really like this spot and we want it to be loud. Loud isn't the only way to make something expressive. and you can increase your contrast, your excitement, your dynamic range by exploring the bottom end of your dynamic range. So one of my favorite things when I was able to perform for audiences regularly, one of my favorite things, especially like in a chamber music setting, would be to lower the dynamics to a point where the audience leans in. And they're physically leaning in. You've engaged them in a way that they didn't even consciously realize, and they're just literally at the edge of their seats listening for the next idea that is coming out of the group that you're playing with. So, if you're able to captivate an audience with quiet dynamics, I find that to be one of the most special musical experiences that I know, and it's something that I really love to experiment with. And okay, another question. Let's see. Okay, so this individual owns a basic cardioid mic and wants me to provide some tips on where they should place the mic in a small room to get the best out of it. Okay, so let me explain, excuse me. Let me take a drink of water and then explain, first of all, what a cardioid mic is. A cardioid microphone is a directional microphone. That means that it picks up sound based on the way that it is facing. So, for example, this is a small diaphragm cardioid microphone. And so if I pointed it right at, the camera's not going to say much. If I point it right at myself, it's going to pick up the sound coming from me. And the sound coming from behind me and off to the sides, it's going to mostly reject. So if you're in a small room, which is the second part of this question, how should you place the microphone? So if you're in a small room, the thing that you're most concerned with is reflections from everywhere, basically. So a couple things to start out with. I would make sure that the room is not super boomy. You don't want it to sound like a bathroom or, if I have, you can see I have a wood floor in here. This room can be a little bit boomy, but just off to my side over here, I have a bunch of bookshelves with a bunch of stuff on there. You can't see quite now, but objects, physical objects, whether it's carpet, drapes, books, couch, chairs, dogs. Physical objects will help to dampen the sound in the room. And many people think that, I love the sound in the bathroom when I'm singing, taking a shower. And it's really kind of, I think it's kind of an illusion. If you record it in a bathroom, it's not going to sound like that you're playing Bach in a giant cathedral somewhere in Europe. It's not going to sound that way. When you're playing in a small bathroom, you have high frequencies bouncing everywhere around, and it's basically going to cause the microphone to cancel out a bunch of the sound that's actually coming to it. The microphone, while it works in a similar way as our ears, it doesn't work exactly the same way, and it's not really able to process as well or analyze or receive as well, the difference between direct sound that's coming either directly from the mouth, from the instrument, and especially early reflections. These are first bounces off the walls, the ceilings, the floors. Sound bounces off the floor and then comes to the microphone. So if you're in a very boomy room, the microphone is not really going to differentiate between the reflections and the direct sound, and it'll cause this effect that's called comb filtering, which basically just means that it'll hollow out the core of the sound, I think is the best way to describe it simply. So you want to make sure that it's drier in terms of reverberation than you might enjoy playing in, let's say that. The dry recording will be more accurate to the core and the tone that you're actually producing. And then I would say that you want to probably, first of all, you're going to want to experiment. There's not one right way to record anything. There's always so many different variables, and nothing is correct or incorrect. But I can give you a couple of pointers that will help you to then experiment and get the best results that you possibly can. So if you're using a cardioid microphone, a directional microphone, you have to be aware that if it's really, 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 really close to the instrument, cardioid microphones encounter this thing called the proximity effect, which essentially means that the bass, the low end, the sound from the low end is unnaturally amplified and sounds boomy and blurry, I will say. So it's just kind of, it's undefined, and that's not something you want. That's something that's very, very close. So I would start by moving the microphone, probably if you're at least 2 or 3 feet back from the microphone. I would say perhaps you angle the microphone so that it becomes perpendicular with the angle of your instrument. It's a good place to start, and maybe pointing at the F holes. And let's say you want to start maybe pointing at the F hole on the A string side. But you can experiment moving it around. Let me grab my cello. So if I'm playing and I hold the cello like this, you could start out here, maybe go over here, record a few, maybe like a 10-second excerpt that explores the low end all the way to the high end of the instrument, and move it around a little bit. And then you can think about raising it higher off the ground, lower, and basically kind of staying in that radius. But as soon as your microphone is closer to a reflective surface like a wall, floor, or ceiling than it is to the direct sound from the instrument, then you're going to start getting some questionable results, I will say. It's a good question. I'm going to put my cello back down and answer the next. Okay, here's a question about mixing audio for Google Meetings or Zoom. So, unfortunately, I'll say this. Fortunately, we live in a time where technology has allowed us to connect in this incredible way during the pandemic. You know, we're able to have these video conferences with people all over the world, and you know, many of us teachers are able to continue teaching our students while not in person necessarily, but we can connect with them with video, and so it's wonderful. Unfortunately, all of these video conferencing pieces of software are designed for meetings, really, for the corporate world. So essentially, they're designed to make spoken word, your voice, as clear as possible, and essentially block out and knock out everything else. And the way they do this is with noise canceling algorithms and echo cancellation and all this software that is built into the program, and it's meant to do a couple of things, which is really helpful. First of all, it allows you to be in a video conference with your speakers on, where it won't then send sound feeding back and forth, and it allows people to actually have conversations if there's a little bit of background noise. So for its purpose, you know, Zoom and Google Meetings and all those pieces of software are great. They're designed really, really well. Unfortunately, music, sound coming from our instruments, is much, much different than sound that just comes from the spoken word. When people are speaking, there's a specific range of their voice that is not very large, from the people who speak the lowest to the people who speak the highest. There's not much range, there's not much pitch involved, and essentially the software is trained to throw out everything else so that the sound is as clean as it possibly can be. Unfortunately, the way we listen, and the way we play and we listen to music, we have overtones that are important. We have a huge range that we play, and essentially the software is just trying to figure out what's going on and trying to get rid of everything that doesn't sound like a person speaking. And so it's a real it can be a real challenge. So there are a couple of different things that you can do. Like, for example, the quality of your conversation, of your video conference will be better if you're plugged into the Ethernet, a direct connection, because it's faster than a wireless connection. So if you have a computer and you're able to plug in, that'll help because you can send more data. If you're sending more data, it'll send better audio and video data. Zoom, I know, has specific settings for this original sound, which I suppose does make it a little bit higher bandwidth, and there's a little bit more information sent there. It is certainly not perfect. And then there are also settings such as the automatic gain adjustments that your microphone will do, which if it hears a cello playing all of a sudden, it'll think that it's like a background noise and just cut it off. It tries to adjust the sound that's coming out as it's happening to make it even. And so dynamics get lost and all those things. There are a lot of challenges. So what I would experiment with are using original sound if you're using Zoom, and using manual gain control of the microphone, where you'll have to probably turn it down in order for you to play and it not be too loud. But then you also have to realize at the same time that your spoken word will likely be quieter because you're not speaking as loud as you're likely playing on the instrument at times. So it's a big challenge, and I think I think there are a lot of people who have the same concerns that we all do here. So I think I think the technology will only get better as internet gets faster and more people are trying to do the things that we're trying to do. So I'm optimistic, but at this very moment there isn't a perfect solution, unfortunately. And I guess directly to that question, if you have $100,000 of equipment that you're feeding into Zoom, it's still going to compress it and do all of those things to it. So unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do unless you bypass Zoom entirely and use and send your audio separately in a different way. And that starts to get much more complicated, but it's something that you can do and could explore if you are interested in doing that. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I'm using Zoom microphones for my audition recordings. What would be a reasonable upgrade? I assume Zoom in this case refers to not the software Zoom, webinar software, but the Zoom mini recorders, which is confusing, I know. So they're totally different. They're not related in any way. Zoom makes small devices that record on memory cards and have little microphones built in, and they're actually quite good. They're quite good, and I would recommend experimenting with the way that you use the Zoom recorder before you spend a lot of money on other equipment. So, take some time, like I said with your cardioid microphone before, the placement of it. Take some time really experimenting of like where you can put the microphone and how moving it changes the sound, because it's really a pretty powerful little box that can make a decent recording. An upgrade over that would be something like a recording interface that would plug into your computer. An interface has preamps and an analog to digital converter built in, and will plug in like USB or something like that to your computer. And then you would use microphones to plug into that interface. And my absolute favorite budget, like reasonably priced microphones to use are these microphones by the company Rode. It's an Australian company, and you can buy a matched pair. That means they've been tested in a lab to react almost exactly the same way as each other. So when you're using two of them in a stereo setup, they'll act well together. They'll behave really nicely, because that's actually an important thing. And it's MT5 is the model number of those Rode microphones, which I would recommend. That's probably the next step up from a Zoom recorder, and that a stereo pair of those. And those are actually, this is one of them. So it's a small diaphragm condenser microphone. Let's see. Great. Okay, so a similar question. The minimal hardware needed in addition to the microphone, or can we manage the recording via our phone, tablet, and external mic? Okay, so as I mentioned, in addition to a microphone, you'll need an interface. And there are a whole bunch of interfaces, I think, probably under $200 that have a preamp. Well, in this case, you need two preamps, one for each microphone, that plug into your computer, and you can use them with a bunch of software out there, something like Audacity, which is free. But essentially, that would be all you would need: an interface, microphone cables, and your microphones. That would be what you would need to get started recording separately. The other thing to consider is, I mentioned that really it's not so much about the specific equipment that you have, the cost of your equipment, as it is about the way that you are using it, and understanding that if you're able to balance your direct sound with the reflections, you're going to have a really good result. So something to consider is if you have two devices that can record. So if you have a tablet and a phone, or if you have a friend with a phone, a second phone, or a computer and a tablet, you could literally use the microphone built into your phone. I would still turn it on for recording a video, but essentially you can record a video from farther away, and you can stick the phone, on your music stand or nearby, and you'll be able to put them together afterwards, and that'll have a better result than just your phone by itself. So lots of different ways to experiment with that. Okay, let's see. Okay, here's a music question. What is the role of contemporary music in developing one's career in music, and how has your experience with it changed over time? It's a good question. So, how is contemporary music in developing one's career in music, and how has your experience with it changed? The role. Okay, so I think it's always really, really important that we continue composing music. I myself am not a composer, but I think that it's really, really important to always at least try something once. So whether we're talking about extended techniques that a composer comes up with, I think it's really important to give it a shot, see what happens. So essentially, you don't know what is successful or memorable or great music until you perform it and you actually experience it. So I can tell you in my experience, having worked with composers, it's a really, really interesting collaboration, because I found that they have introduced ways to make sound that I had never considered before, that just changed the way that I approach other things in music. And I think it's really, really important that there's a close collaboration between composers and performers, so that not only can composers be aware of the limitations and not only limitations, but also the what am I trying to say? The abilities that an instrument or a performer might have, and expand on the horizons, try something new. So I always really enjoy working with composers, working with new music, especially when I can collaborate with the composer themselves and really hear from them their ideas, their concepts, and where their music came from. So I think it's hugely important to try to collaborate with as many composers as you possibly can, not only as a student, but as you continue your career in music. It's a good question. Okay, so here's another recording question. For a nice recording, is there a mixture of cardioid and omni? Okay, that's a great question. So for those of you, I'll explain what those terms mean again. So cardioid essentially just means it's a directional microphone, and omni is short for omnidirectional, which means it's not directional at all. Theoretically, it hears sound, it receives sound the same from any direction. So it wouldn't matter if I'm pointing at myself or over there. As long as the distance is the same, it will pick up the sound. So there are a couple of important reasons to use the two different types of microphones. So an omnidirectional microphone, one that does not take into account the directionality of sound necessarily, is that you can use it to pick up an equal balance of the direct sound coming from your instrument and everything else that's coming in the room. So generally speaking, if you were to have a directional or a cardioid microphone and an omnidirectional microphone in the same location, the cardioid, the directional microphone, it would be more dry because it's not picking up as much of the resonance of the room as the omnidirectional microphone is. But when you're actually making a recording, a stereo recording, which means there's a left and a right side, does not mean necessarily that it's two microphones, a left and a right. A stereo recording has to do with the way that all of the signals coming in are mixed into a balance between the left and right. So very often I use a combination of cardioid and omnidirectional microphones in my recordings. I'll give you an example. Back just a few months ago, when the North Carolina Symphony, when we were performing all the time, I also serve as the archival engineer for the orchestra. And what that means is that I record all of our performances for our archive so that we have a collection of all the performances that we've done. And so when I'm recording that, I record using a technique called multi-track digital recording, which essentially means that each microphone I use, which is more than two, is recorded individually on its own, and in that way I can mix it and balance all the different microphones. I can mix that after the performance. So I'll go warm up and, I'm out of order here. I'll arrive at the concert hall, I will set up all my recording equipment, I will go warm up, and I will press record, and I will check it about 100 times to make sure it is recording, because I will then walk on stage and perform a concert. Afterwards, come off stage, turn off the recording, and then I can go home and mix it later before I actually turn it into that stereo recording. And so multi-track recording basically means I can just change anything, the balance between the microphones afterwards, which is great when I'm playing. And so I almost always use a balance of directional and non-directional microphones. So I use a main pair, two microphones that work together essentially. They're about 4 feet apart, and they're in front of the orchestra. And then if there's a soloist, I'll often drop in a directional mic for the soloist that I will mix in ever so slightly. And all that really does is to take that instrument, let's say it's a violin soloist, and really help locate it in the mix. So one of the really big challenges when you're recording is the sound stage, is the balance left to right, front to back of the stage that you're trying to recreate. And if I have a microphone hanging from the ceiling that is directional and it's focused right on that violin, it's not loud, it's not a big part of the mix, but it's brought in just a tiny, tiny bit to the point where the violin stops sounding like it's as wide as an orchestra, and it starts sounding like it's one person standing where they're standing. And it's important to understand when you're mixing a recording, to make it sound in a way that is that is realistic to the performance. At least if you're doing a classical recording, when you're really just trying to be representative of the event that happened. So the orchestra is, 80 feet wide or something, and the violinist is standing, just to the right of the conductor, or to the left of the conductor, and the soloist is right there, and basically I will mix in a directional microphone there to try to position this soloist exactly in my ears, in the headphones or the speakers, the way that they would actually be in the concert hall. Okay, so yes, absolutely, there's a mixture of cardioid and Omni microphones. Okay, assuming that recordings for schools and festivals will be homemade this year, do I think it's worth the investment to get an external webcam to supplement the webcam that comes on laptops? Okay, great question. So, external webcam for computer, I would say no, it is not worth it. I would say that perhaps you should consider using your smartphone as the device that is recording. The camera on your smartphone is going to be far superior than that in your laptop. And so that's a great place to start. And the other thing to consider is, and it's a little bit more difficult to set up, but you have your, if this is your phone, many people will record themselves so they see themselves in the screen, and they'll use, what's called the selfie camera to record themselves. When in fact the camera on the back of your phone it's a better camera. It'll have much better quality. So what I would recommend, and it's tricky to set up the shot right because you won't be able to see it, but you'll actually want to set it up this way, and then you'll be able to use the higher quality camera from your phone. And then you can use either the microphone that's built in to your phone or an external one recorded separately and mix it back together for those recordings. That's what I would recommend. Okay, post-production tips specific to our recording of solo cello in a home setting. Post-production tips. Okay, so you always want to be careful to with post-production, especially in our classical realm. You never want to have to fix it in the mix. You want to be able to record something that sounds representative of how it does in the room. Excuse me. So, post-production tips. I would say that you could perhaps use something called a high-pass filter, which is an equalizer that rolls off the very lowest end, especially if there's a rumble from an air conditioner or something in the room, and you would start rolling that off, maybe 50 or 60 hertz would be a place to start. You don't want to go crazy with EQ in your recordings. I would much rather spend the time finding the right place to put the microphone so it's representative of the way it sounds in the room. So that's the rule of thumb, I would say then, is to make sure that you experiment enough with recording that you don't have to do too many adjustments afterwards. Okay, why do I recommend a matched pair instead of a single microphone? So with a single microphone, it's impossible to record in stereo. By definition, you need to have two different sources, at least two different, to have a stereo sound, because essentially stereo shows off the difference in time that it takes for sound to get to one microphone or the other, or the difference in volume based on the direction that the sound is coming from. So if you want to record in stereo, which is a more full, natural sound, then you'll need two microphones. If you don't want to record in stereo, which you don't necessarily need to, you'll record in mono, you only need one. Stereo gives you more opportunities to record more realistic sound, and as long as you're using it in a proper way. There are a couple of different techniques, stereo microphone techniques that you can use. Especially with directional mics, it's important that they're pointing in the right direction for them to interact in the way that they should. There are guides all over the internet where I think you can find two techniques that are useful are XY and ORTF. You can look those up and experiment with those. But I think, unfortunately, we've run out of time today, so I just want to thank you all for being here, joining me today. Thank you for your interest. Well and healthy, and continue to explore cello and maybe investigate recording a little bit. So thanks again to Cello Bello, to Paul Katz, and all of you for joining me this afternoon. And I hope that you are all well. Thanks.